just to get started, just to show where you can find more information, you can find Databricks trainings on our portal at the following link. And if you go to the portal, you can go right here. If you go to portal and you go to trainings, you can see Databricks training. You can see things there. And you can see we've answered some questions. We're going to fill this out more. We also have in the support, we have FAQ sections. You can find things here. And that's on the portal. We do have a Confluence page where you can find it. I believe that is this one right here. And then we have our data camp programs. And you can find our data camp program if you go to QDAS and then you go to data camp. You can see these where our spring ones are. And right here, you can find our fall ones. I can see all the programs here because I'm a member of the stuff. You should just be able to see these two folders. So yeah, you should be able to find all of our data camp stuff there, and that has interesting stuff to get started with. All right, so let's get started with this presentation. So we are going to be talking about the Databricks Workspace and how it is different from the SaaS Workspace UFM. We are going to be talking about the CDR catalog. We are going to be talking about compute. We're going to show you how to create a workflow. We're going to touch a bit on how your GitHub, you can get GitHub repos to Databricks. We have documentation for this, so we're just going to talk about that for very little. And then we're going to show you how you can upload data to S3 buckets and a discussion about PySpark. Okay, so Databricks Workspace. So when you go to the Databricks Workspace, it looks, when you start out in a home area. And when you get there, you start out in your user folder. So here you have a user folder. If you go to the workspaces, you can see team folders. As admin, I have access to everything. You will only see the folders that you have stuff that is shared with you. So if you have nothing shared with you in these folders, you won't see them. So it'll be a lot easier for you to navigate than it will be for me. One area to point out is this shared one. Anything in shared is shared with everybody. So you want to be careful about putting things here. And let's go back here. One of the things you can do with this stuff, you can share with people. So I can, if I have stuff in my user folder, I can share it with whoever I like. And I can do that by going to share permission. And then I could add somebody. So if I wanted to add like Derek to this, I could share that with him. And then I can set it at a number of different levels. If I set to can view, that means Derek will be able to view it. He won't be able to do anything with it. If I set to can run, he'll be able to run the program, but he won't be able to change it. If I give him can edit, he'll be able to make changes. And if I give him can manage, he'll be able to like delete it or give access to somebody else. In general, when you do sharing, we want to make sure that you share with the minimum people as possible, and you try to give them the minimum permissions as possible. So if you just want somebody to be able to view something, we would encourage you not to give them can manage, and so on and so forth. One thing we need to be careful about is what you could do is you can do all workspace users. When you do that, everyone can see it. And that means that everyone will be able to see what you have. And if you give them can manage, it means that anyone will be able to delete your stuff. And that's something that we discourage. You probably don't want to give just some random person that stuff. So we want you to be very careful about how you use this stuff and how you use sharing. So let's go to some of these programs. In general, you can store just about anything in this location. So you could upload, I mean, I have notebooks, you could upload files of some sort, some with JS files, Excel files, so forth. The problem is that this stuff isn't backed up to our S3 as well. So anything you put in here, it's not going to be backed up to where all your other stuff is. So it very easily could be lost. So you want to only keep notebooks in here. And really, you don't want to keep so many notebooks in here. You want to create your stuff in a notebook in your user folder. When you're a bit farther along, what you want to do is you want to go to your team folder. And you go to Workspace. You go to Workspace, I should go to favorite because I don't know if you're going to find otherwise. So you have your team folder. You may want to store stuff in a folder in your team stuff when you're closer to it being ready to go out to scene in prime time, but it's not fully there yet, and you want other people to be able to see it. But eventually, what you want to be able to do is you want to get into a GitHub repo. And once it's in a GitHub repo, that has a lot of advantages because GitHub has version control, and you don't need to worry about like the stuff getting lost. You don't need to worry about where it's being kept. If it's in GitHub, you're going to be in good shape. So that's just some of the stuff about how do you get that stuff. In the workspaces, there are size limitations. Workspace, you can only get a file of 50 megabytes in here, and that is plenty for a notebook. You're never going to have a notebook that big. But if you were to keep data in here and it gets too big, you might run into problems. So, yeah. And also, when you're in your team thing, you can also give permissions to people. You can have things shared. The things in your team, I believe it gets your group automatically. So it makes it easier to share. But if you always wanted to give somebody else permissions, then you could do that. And ideally, you do that just for the notebook or folder, and you wouldn't try and do it for the team folder itself. Okay. Does anybody have any questions in the chat about workspaces?
Yes, we have a question from Courtney Stower in the chat. It says, is it everyone in our team's workspace or everyone on Databricks?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So your user folder is designed only to be for you. Your team folder, that is designed to be for your team. Shared is designed to be for everybody. And there are very few cases. I can't imagine a case where you would want to do that. But in theory, if there was something you want to share with everybody, it would go there.
Right. Sorry, if I can just, I think that Courtney also, like, if you set it to be all users, and if you set the permissions to all users, that refers to everybody with access to the CDR Databricks. So every organization that works with the CDR Databricks environment.
Are there any more questions, or
Yeah,
should we go
there
on?
is a
Yes,
second.
there was a second question in the chat that says the DBX group folder under Workspace, is it shared with all users within the same DBX group?
Yes. So anything that is in the team folder, and I presume you mean like the CDR PDA dash NIF or dash, like for maybe 2 dash or 2 dash, that will be shared with everyone on your team.
Okay, and then one more question says, does the entire group have access to the specific user folders, or is access limited to the user only?
So the default is user only. I should mention that you could give people access to something that's in your user folder. In general, though, what you want to do is you should keep your user folder for things that you're just starting out doing things, you're just testing, you're not really very far along with. And then once you think it's ready for other people to see, that's when it should probably go into the team folder. And once it's in the team folder, your whole team will be able to see it.
Hey, Janae, I'm on now and able to field questions because I have to copy them over anyway into our Confluence internal page. So if you want me to take over now, I can.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you.
I appreciate you helping me though while I was still struggling with our Zoom registration. So our next question then, you mentioned about 1 TB space. Is it for personal workspace or team space?
No, I mentioned 50 megabytes, and that is a file size limit. And again, this workspace, it is meant to be for notebooks, really. And at some point, I would be surprised if we make it that only notebook. So for a notebook, 50 megabytes is huge. It's inconceivable for a program to be that large. It's when you get into other files that shouldn't be in the workspace that you might run into issues.
Okay, and then Oren, we had one, and I think it's a follow-up question to something you had been previously answering. It says, can you also clarify the backups portion is nothing backed up?
Yeah, the backups are not on a Databricks workspace, so you want to be very careful about what you want to put here. And
Yeah, so Oren, it is backed up. It's not backed up within our environment. It's the Databricks team that owns this workspace, and they own the back end of this workspace. So it is backed up by the Databricks team. We would have to work with Databricks support in order to go in and find something, because this is not directly linked to anything within our own Amazon Web Services account that we manage across other platforms.
Okay, and then another question, and then Oren, when you want to move on and you want to
yeah,
save questions,
we should move
okay,
on
so
because we're
I'll
gonna.
flag these. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries at
Any
all.
questions
I'll
you
flag
have.
them. That way, if we have time, we can come back.
Okay. So we talked about the Databricks workspace. Let's talk about the SaaS workspace for a bit. And to do that, I need to sign in here. So we have two different environments where we save things. The first one is MFT and SaaS. And if I go into MFT and I go into network shares, what you see in MFT is the same thing as what you see in SaaS. And for example, that's my folder in SaaS. You can see I have stuff here. If I go into SaaS, you can see that's the daemon. You can see this is all the same. You can see that's all the same. And then you can see all this stuff here. You can see these here are the same as these here. So MFT and the SaaS workspace, they point to the same area. The Databricks workspace, as you can see, if I were to go into my own, you can see this is very different. And if I were to go to my team folder, you can see also very different. Yeah, so that's not the same. And the stuff on our SaaS workspace, the SaaS UFM, that's stored in an S3 bucket that we control. And that's why, if something gets deleted, we can get it fixed easily. The thing you have to understand is that Databricks can very easily read the stuff that's on the SaaS workspace. So anything that is here, Databricks can get to. The stuff that is on Databricks, so the stuff that is over here, SaaS can't get to it. So if you're still working between SaaS and Databricks, and you have stuff saved on your Databricks workspace, then anyone using SaaS won't be able to get to this stuff, which is problematic. And that's another reason why we discourage using that Databricks workspace. And just to give a basic visual aid, we have AWS. In our AWS account, we have a Workbench S3, we have a database S3. So the Workbench S3, that has all the stuff that we have stored here. And then the database S3, if we go to catalog, That's going to store all the things here. And this is basically the CDR itself. And that's going to take a while to load. So yeah, so any of these things, so if I were to go to public data, and yeah, then this is something that it's public data, everyone has access to it. This is the CDR. That's also stored on AWS. That's something that we have. And then from that workbench, you can connect to it via SaaS. You can get to it via Databricks. They can both connect to it. But the Databricks workspace, again, only can be reached by Databricks. And also the Databricks S3, you can connect to it using Viya, using the macros we've created, or you can get there via the Databricks UI, or you can even create a program that runs the stuff that can connect to S3. But in general, if you want to use a Viya connects to the workspace and connects to the S3 stuff. Databricks connects to the workbench and the database stuff. But the Databricks workspace, that can only be got by Databricks. That's just something to keep in mind. And also it means that when eventually we go away from SaaS Viya, all your stuff that's in the SaaS workbench, that's in those workbenches, that's all going to be saved. You will be able to get to them, whether via UFM or via Databricks, and you'll be able to see everything. So you don't need to worry about when SaaS goes away, whether or not all that stuff will be gone. That's all going to be there because that's all saved in AWS, and you'll still be able to get to it using Databricks and UFM. We should go on. So catalogs. So we looked at this a little. The catalog, that is basically the CDR. And basically a catalog, it's made up of schemas, it's made up of tables. So public data, for example, that is a schema. And in this schema, we have tables. And yep, you can tell anything that's here available to everybody. So you can see that you have 30 tables in here. We have about 500 schemas, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of tables, lots of stuff. As a user, you can only access the schemas here that your DUA allows. So if your DUA allows, for example, you have access to beneficiary, you can access that data. Or for like CSAT2, if you have access to certain tables there, you can access that based on your DUA. And you should be able to connect to everything here that is in that when you go to SaaSFi, when you connect to the CDR, any of the stuff there that you should be able to connect to that also. So if you can connect to the SaaSFi, you should be able to connect to it using Databricks. And the nice thing about Databricks is that unlike SaaSFi, it makes it a lot easier to look at individual tables. You can see everything that's out there. The problem that we're seeing though, a database is only schemas and tables. You can't put folders, you can't build complicated folder structures in them. So on your workbench, you might have a folder for each like team member, or you might have a folder for each project, or you might have a folder for a task or what have you. Whatever you want to create folders for, maybe a folder for some of your programs that you want everyone, functions that you want everyone to use. So you can do that with the workbench, but the catalog won't store that. So catalog, it's only schemas, it's only tables, it's only in this format. And if you want anything outside of data like that, then you need to save it in your workbench. And just to show how things look so in here, we can look at certain things. You can see where stuff is stored, for example. This tells you who the owner is. And knowing the owner is very useful because sometimes when you create data in a catalog, depending on who the owner is, it depends on whether or not you can actually delete it. So here the owner is CDR elevated. So to delete the schema, I would need to be part of that. But if I were to go to this one, this one, for example, okay, this is owned by Fatzel, so I would need the Fatzel to delete it. And just gain more here. But you can do it when you click on tables, it shows you an overview. And this is like a proc content in SAS. It tells you things about basically about the schema, about the table, things just about the formats of the field. And apparently there are comments, so you can get some information about them and things like that. If you go to sample data, I don't think I'm gonna do that, it would show you a bit of a sample of how the data looks. And that way you can just make sure your stuff is right. And then we get into details. So this shows you when a file was created. Remember, this is the created date and not the updated date. So suppose I have a file that I create, say, in January, and then in February I updated, I add 10,000 records. In March, I had 10,000 records. In April, I had 10,000 records, so on and so forth. This would still say January 2024. So just something to be careful of. If you see something weird in the created at, don't get too worried quickly, because it might just be that something they did with an update or something like that, and it doesn't get registered. Don't think of this as the updated date. And this also goes to location. And then the final thing here is permissions. And you won't have these, but this can tell you who can actually access the table. And this is in public data, so everyone should be able to do that. Okay, so that is catalogs. Yeah, we're running low on time, so we better keep on moving. Let's talk about workflows. So workflows are sort of like the SAS scheduler, except it works a lot better. And just to show you, if we were to create a job, so basically the way it works is you can create a number of tasks in the workflow, each of which are probably going to be a program. And you can run them either concurrently, or you can run them independent of each other, or you can run them however you want. But basically, you can set a number of programs to run, and it will go through one whole major workflow. And like this comes in handy. Like there's some jobs where we had to run a process that was 12 programs, and so you would put in a workflow like this, and then you would say, I don't know, maybe job 4 depends on job 1. So I would say make job 4 dependent on job 1 finishing, and so on and so forth. And basically that this works well because this works concurrently. So if jobs 1, 2, and 3 are all independent of each other, they can run, and you don't need to, they'll all run at the same time, because that's how the job flow works. And you don't need to worry about keying stuff off manually themselves. So this is pretty straightforward. Task name is just the name of whatever the first program you want to run is. And your type, you can do a whole number of things. We will probably be doing notebooks. So this connects to a notebook. And yeah, in a notebook, in case you aren't aware, if you go to new, you go to notebook, that just will let you sign up to do a notebook, and you can have whatever codes in there you can have running. The source can either be the workspace, that is the Databricks workspace, or it can be the Git provider. And that is if you have a Git repo configured, you can have the program there. This will grab the program from Git directly, and then you don't need to have the stuff saved in your workspace. And then here for the path, you would just select the notebook. For clusters, so at some point, we're going to have job clusters where you will be able to set up your jobs to run automatically. And it will run, the job cluster may have more resources, so it'll be easier to run. And you can just set up for whatever cluster you want, and well, whatever cluster is available, and it'll be able to run. At the moment, you want to make sure to pick your team cluster. And that is because clusters only have the same permissions that your group would have. So for example, suppose I do QDAS because that's mine. So if I'm writing stuff on QDAS, anything that runs on QDAS will work. But if QDAS doesn't have permissions for it, then it won't work. So for example, so if I was writing stuff maybe as a line and I tried to run Great Plains stuff, that wouldn't work. It would tell me I don't have permissions because even though I have permissions, my compute doesn't have permissions. And my compute doesn't have permissions, then it won't work. Also, going forward, there are parameters you can add to stuff. That's something that if there's some value you want to set, like, I don't know, maybe you want to put in like quarter and you want to be 2024 Q1, for example, you can just do it right here. And this is sort of useful because it sort of takes the place like of those macro variables that we have in test programs we normally have. Just where like, if your quarter changes each time you run things, but you're not sure what it's going to be, you can just put it in a parameter and then you don't need to change the notebooks or Git itself. You can just change the parameter in the job. That's just one of the helpful things there. Notifications. For that, you can add a notification and you can have it be sent to you, or you can send it to Slack. And that is if you're starting to send a notification or success or on failure, you can have it send you an email. And that's just helpful because that means if something fails, you will get an email knowing, so you don't need to and that's useful if you're on a 3-day vacation. You probably don't want to check if you have something running at 4 a.m. You probably don't want to check if it works. You want an email if it fails. That's good to know there. We have duration threshold and we have retries. The duration threshold is how long you want to go for you to get a warning and how long you want to go for it to end. And this is useful if you have a program that's only supposed to take 10 minutes. So maybe you would set a warning at 20 minutes, you put a timeout at 45 minutes, and at 45 minutes, it would fail. And that is useful because if you're running something, you don't want it to, and actually this duration threshold, I said, this is for the task. This isn't for the whole workflow. So you can have different duration thresholds for like each task in a workflow. And I mean, this comes in handy when, you're running something and if it's taking longer than you think it's taking, then maybe there's an error, but maybe it didn't error out right away. So it's still processing for some reason, but if it's taking 45 minutes and it should take 10 minutes, something's going wrong. So this will end the job and it'll send you an email so you don't find out 5 hours later, you'll find out half an hour later that something weird's going on. And you can set retries. You can retry the stuff if it fails. And that's if you have something that fails every once in a while. So maybe it fails every few times. You can have a retry if necessary, and so on and so forth. For add schedule, that you can either have it so it runs manually, or you can set it on a schedule. So I can have it run, say, every day at this time, or I can do every week, I can do every hour, every month. And then I can have it continuous, and that is, it would always be running, which probably isn't useful for anything you're doing, but just something good to know about. Now, so let's actually go to a workflow. And this is one I created for this. So I have it set up. This is the runs that shows you whether or not it's successful. You can see that I have this set so that it is running manually. And you can see how long it usually takes. This time it took you 13, which is a really long time. So maybe I might have set a warning to let me know something's weird there and let me know how it failed and all that good stuff. You can see I'm running it as me. And if we go into tasks, you can see I have 2 tasks here. The first task named task 1. It is a notebook. It is pointed at a workspace, and it is pointing to this path, which is just right over here. And that's the thing itself. It's going to be among the Qdesk things, and you can see it is running on the Qdesk compute cluster. And you can see I am passing a parameter there, a parameter called test at the value of 47. And I have it sending me a notification whether it is successful or whether there is failure. And then here is task 2. Task 2 is also on QDAS. You can see it depends on task 1. So it waits for task 1 to finish before starting, and it only runs if it was successful. If it's not successful, then it is going to fail. And here I could change it to any of these things. So I could wait until one has succeeded, or maybe none has failed. So that's, I mean, that's what it says here. If I have something that maybe I have 3 dependencies, but maybe I only want 2 of them run at certain times, I can set it to that. Or if I see whether it's all done, then I can run that. Or maybe I want this to run if something fails. So maybe I want a QC task, for example, where if something fails, I want to know about it. So I'll run something that will look at the stuff and say this failed and try to tell me why it failed. And yeah, let's try it now while we're waiting. And we can go to there, we can go to View Run. And while we're waiting, this is taking a bit of time. You can see this is still in block because it's waiting. So let's go to the programs itself. So I have this first program. It prints out a hello world, and then it is importing the random package, and it is setting, I'm basically just grabbing a random number between 0 to 1. I'm printing it, and then I'm saying if it is less than 5, then I'm setting this key example equals 5, value equals 5, and otherwise I'm setting the thing that's equal to 50. And then if I go to the second program, if I go to the third, okay, let me just go to find that second program. I guess I didn't have it saved. Yep. If we go to the second one, we have it. It is going to grab whatever was in test. So it's grabbing that 47. It's going to print that, and then it's going to grab what we generated in task 1. And based on what's in task 1, it's going to say it's less than 5, it's more than 5, what have you. And by now this should be done. So this took 14 seconds, that took 19 seconds. So you can see that was successful. And if we go here, this shows me what happened in task 1. It shows me what happened. And I got 0.474. So my example should be 5. And let's see if that happened here. And I hit the wrong thing, so I'll have to go back. If I go to task 2, okay, it printed 47 and printed 5 because this was less than, this is 0.47, so it print 5, and now it's saying the random number was less than 0.5. Yeah, so that's an intro to how workflows work. And yeah, okay. So one of the things you can do is if we go to workspaces, we go to repos, you can see that we have repo set up. And that is something that Databricks allows you to do. Databricks allows you to connect to GitHub. We're not going to have time to really talk about it, but Dan created this Confluent page, and you can just look for it, and you'll be able to see how to do it. It's very well detailed, and it should be able to tell you everything you need to know about you connecting to GitHub repos using Databricks, so you can store your stuff there. Okay, let's talk about computes. You can see there's a number of different computes here. There are SQL warehouses, which allow you to connect to SQL. And that's what Viya is using to connect to Databricks right now. We have job computes, which are going to be available in the near future, but are not available yet. And that's if you have a workflow and you want to run something, you do it there. And then we have the all-purpose clusters. And that's what you should be using. And your org should have 2. You should have a compute cluster. You should have an R-only cluster. At the moment, the compute cluster that you can use Python and SQL on, and the QDAS R-only one, that allows you to do all technically, but it's not connected to the CDR yet. That's something we're working on getting. And at some point, you'll be able to use R to connect to the CDR. That's not quite ready yet. And if we click on this QDAS compute cluster, so you can see when you connect here, you can see things about the cluster. You can see the runtime version. That's 12.2 LTS. And you might run the things some some functions that they require a certain runtimes version. So you can look there and you can see whether your cluster has it or not. And if it requires something that a more recent runtime version than the one existing here, then it won't work. Just something to keep in mind. Going forward, you can see that it terminates after 60 minutes of inactivity. So if nobody uses it for 60 minutes, it turns off. And then next time somebody turns it on again, sometimes when wants to run something on it, they'll turn it on again. And then here you can see that we have drivers and workers. So basically you can see that we have this cluster is configured to have one driver and 30 workers. So Databricks is built on Spark and it's designed to work with Spark. So if you do stuff in if you use PySpark or RSpark to run stuff, it will run much faster. If you're only using Python or if you're just using Python, the Databricks SQL uses Spark also. So it's not an issue, but if you're running stuff in Python, it will only use the driver. If you're running stuff in Spark, it will use the drivers and the workers. And that means that instead of 32 gigabytes of memory, if you're running something in Spark, you have potentially 512 gigabytes of memory, which will make things run faster. If you have a lot of data, it means it might be able to process it. So just something good to keep in mind when running stuff that you may want to use Spark. If I go to the Notebooks tab, I can see all the notebooks connected to the cluster. And we can talk about that a little. Let's just, I don't want to do that, but let's just go to new, let's just go to notebook quickly. Yeah, so when I create a new notebook, I can have it connect to a certain cluster. And basically it's running in these clusters. So this notebook, when it runs, it connects to the clusters here. And you can see that there are 9 clusters that are attached. There are nine notebooks that are attached to the cluster. None of them are running at the moment. And basically this will let you know whether anything else is running or whether anything else is connected, who was running something, who might be running something soon, and just gives you some information about the stuff. It lets you know, maybe there's a lot of things running. It'll give you an idea about how many resources are available. And then there's also the event log. And the event log lets you know, it gives you an idea about how many workers are being used. So I know that at 3:20, I can see that 30 were being used by something. And then it must have finished at 3:27 because it went all the way down to 1. I can, if there's an error with the stuff, it will show up here and also tell you like who is starting it. So I can see that Tommy is the one who started this. And I can tell who is running things. And again, as we mentioned before, compute clusters can only access data based on the DOA of the org, and you can only see that compute that you have access for. And yeah. Okay, uploading S3 data to Databricks. Let's close that out. So if we go here, so we talked to them about the CDR, we talked to them about the workbench, and as we mentioned, the CDR, that is a database. It's stored in Glue at the moment. And basically the CDR, that is just databases and tables. And the workbench is more just like an operating system. So like it's like it can be in folders and it is more any type of file, but it's not easy to use. The good thing about like the CDR, it's a database so you can use SQL on it. The workbench, they're just files. So you can't use SQL until you read the data in. And one of the things we're doing right here is this is an example of how you would create a data frame. And here I am just creating a data frame that has 4 records. It has a few tables in it, a few columns in it. The data is meaningless. And this is your data frame. And then what I am doing right here is I am creating a temporary table. And one thing to mention, this is a Spark data frame as opposed to a Pandas data frame. And then if I run this, this would create a file and send it to the CDR. And yeah, let's run it while we're Waiting, and we can go to the catalog. Go to public data. And and we just created something, and if we refresh, hopefully it will show up. Okay, so let me go down here. And go to the second one. And we go here and we see that was created. And you can see certain things about it. You can tell that I created it. I created it as a Delta. Delta is Databricks' preferred data format. So it runs things a bit quicker if you can create things in it, but you shouldn't feel pressured to do so. And you can see I just created it 47 seconds ago. So, and then if you were to run this, this would show you, you can see that there's 4 records created. And then here, this just shows how you can create a PySpark data frame with it. So I could take a file that I have. So if we go back to my SQL, so you can see I have this CSV file right here. So what we can do here is we can just run this. And you can tell it goes very fast, 2 seconds. It's read the table. It's showing me the things about it. So you can see I have these 4 tables. I can see I have an ID, I have a name, I have quiz scores, a teacher's grading thing. And that will show you some things. And what I can do here is I'm just creating a new, I'm taking that file and I'm adding a file, adding a row to it. So I'm adding this column COVID flag, and I set the value to 0, and that runs there. And if I run this, so this will output a new file called Transfers to Topics 1 output. And if I go to MFC, it's just knocking me out there. And you go here and you can see my output was created. So that's just a way of, yeah, just a way of sending data. This is just an example of how you can send data from Databricks to the AWS workbenches. And yeah, that is what I have. Let's do some questions.
Okay, Oren, one question was that we Derek just got back to it, that the sample code will be made available, which I'm sure other people are wondering as well. And Derek responded that the notebooks and sample code will be available to all users. And then just a reminder, as I was having technical glitches there at the beginning, accessing our Zoom registration link, that materials will be made available after our meetings, and we'll be sending the recordings as well. Okay, so Oren, to some other questions then. Is the ideal you mentioned, and if you've gotten to any of these, just let me know and we'll move to the next one then. Is the ideal you mentioned work in user folder, arrow move to team folder, and then arrow over move to GitHub repo?
Yes, that is exactly what you want to do. And the idea is user folder stuff, that's going to be your stuff at the very beginning. That's not really ready for prime time. Once it's ready a bit more and you think people want to take a look at it, that's moving into the team folder. And then when it's ready to go into a workflow, that's when it's ready to go into GitHub repo.
So one thing I'll add on to that is it's going to be dependent on your team as well, right? It's your guys' choice. Your group folders in the workspace, you can treat them similar to how you do is with like SaaS workbenches, in the sense of you can create whatever folder structure you want. If you want a development folder, and then a prod folder for okay, all of these notebooks and things, I'm going to start in development and move it into prod when it's ready. You can do that, right? So that anybody in your group can access that location. Because otherwise, if it is in your user folder, you have to explicitly grant shared permissions and access to other users to view it and see it. So if it's something contract specific, you can work it out with your team on how you want to develop it within your workspace in your organization specific folder. But then, yes, of course, having a GitHub integration with a cloned repository is the best way to kind of do version control. But understanding not everybody knows Git, not everybody even has a license to utilize Git. So that might not be available to everybody. But yes.
Right, and one other thing to keep in mind, if you were to go to the reposting in your workspace, this will let you connect to your GitHub repo. So if you wanted to run something, you could just connect your repo via the workspace, click on your folder, and then just select your Databricks notebook from there.
Okay, so our next question, if we save data in Workspace, what's the size limited in total?
I know that there is a limit based on individual files. I do not know what the total amount is.
I don't think there is, Oren. I think it's limited by specific individual files have limited sizes. But again, heavily recommend that you do not save data in your workspace area. That is what your S3 workbench is for. That is what the CDR databases are for.
For no other reason.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just gonna say, for no other reason, we'll get into this in the next office hour session, but it has to do with your permissions and who has access and who can control your data as well, and the content within those folders.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
our next question, this may be answered later, but currently exports to Excel files using pandas, for example, don't appear to have a way to export directly to S3 without exporting to Workspace first and then copying that file to S3. Will that change in the future?
So, and I don't want to take over, Oren, but you actually have to write it out if you're using pandas, you have to write it out to the local file system. Future office hours are going to hit on these specific topics. This topic and other questions you might still have after this was more introductory. So we are going to be getting into the next topic, bringing data in from S3 from the CDR, writing data out to S3 to the CDR. We have lots and lots of code right now in notebooks that were shared in DataCamp that everybody has view access to right now. With all of this information available, we'll also be creating additional artifacts specific to these types of things, additional code repositories that will be shared with everybody for specific use cases. So all of this stuff will be available and is currently available. We're working on organizing it and making it more structured and easily digested.
In the meantime, Derek, I'm going to drop the DataCamp Confluence page right now in the chat. That way, if anyone wants to review any sessions or even recordings, there's also the instructions how to access the notebooks for now and there as well.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so next, can we create a new schema with tables?
So at the moment, no. At the moment, schemas are controlled by the QDS team. You would need to request one, but in general, we're hoping that you create your own, that you just use your own team schema, and you'll use that for tables the way schemas normally work. And we're trying to keep it at one schema per org.
Okay, thanks, Soren. When we create a table in Hive, can the owner be set to the team group by default? Right now, it is belonging to the individual.
That is a good question. No, the
No.
problem, we are not able to do that at the moment. At the moment, when you run it in Databricks, it is set to individual because that's the person that is creating it. When you create a file in Viya, it belongs to your group service principal because that is who's creating it. And we are not able to set it so that it belongs to your group. It has to be belonging by the person that creates it. And that's why it is so important that when you create a table, you should alter the table permissions to belong to the group after you create it, because otherwise anybody else who tries to alter the table, they won't have permissions, they won't be able to do it. And if they need to drop it for some reason, they won't be able to do that either. So that's why you want to, whoever creates the file should make sure to do alter table on it. And they have to be specifically conscious about that because when you're using Databricks, you're the only individual who creates it. It's the only one who can change those permissions.
Okay, thanks. Is it possible to kick off multiple tasks in parallel within the same job?
In the same workflow, yeah, you can do
Okay.
that. You just don't set a task as a dependency. So you can have 3 tasks. You don't set a dependency for them, and then they will all run at the same time. And then if you set up a dependency for task 4 that says wait for task 1, 2, and 3 to finish, then it will wait for those 3.
I would like to point out that at this time, even though you're running them in parallel, you're running them off of a shared compute resource. So just be aware that, overall compute resources are going to be, and availability is dependent upon your entire team and what's going on with those compute resources, compute clusters at this time. We are looking to move beyond that, but that's what it is right now.
Thanks, Dan. Sometimes it took a long time to start the cluster. Is there a tip to start it faster?
No. Because
Yeah, no.
sometimes when you have clusters, it just takes a while for them to start. And if no one's writing stuff on them, it'll take how long it takes. It might take a minute or 2.
That's a
Yeah.
Databricks thing.
It's an AWS thing as well. And so when you start it up, even when you start it up initially, that initial run on it might be a little laggy, a little slow, and then it starts really hitting the ground running after running like an initial query or something.
Will Databricks have support for native R packaging in addition to RSpark?
It currently does.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, it's just that again, R and most of Python packages, unless they're explicitly written to utilize Spark data frames, are only going to be able to run on a single node, in which case they're all going to have to, everything's going to be processed on the driver node. We will get into that discussion in the future as well. But yeah, right now you can run anything you want for R, but it is going to be limited by the size of the nodes.